Millionaire CEO faints while driving. Brave little girl saves his life by taking the wheel. The night stretched endlessly, painted in deep shades of navy and black as the highway wound forward in silence, each flickering streetlight casting fleeting shadows across the polished hood of Michael Carter's sleek black car. The engine purred softly, steady and precise, but the sound only emphasized how hollow the world around him felt. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, his hands firm yet weary, the leather smooth under his palms. Once, he would have enjoyed this drive, proud of the luxury he had earned, but tonight even the gleam of his prized possession couldn't lift the weight pressing on his chest. He was a man who had reached the pinnacle of success, a millionaire CEO whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose name commanded boardrooms, yet his heart carried a heaviness that no fortune could ease. Board meetings and contracts consumed every hour of his life, yet not one of those victories could fill the emptiness that trailed him like a shadow. His mansion was vast, adorned with marble, glass, and polished wood, yet it felt colder than the night air outside his window. Applause followed him wherever he went, cameras flashed in his direction, but none of it warmed the silence that wrapped around him when the doors of his home closed at the end of the day. He sighed quietly, eyes fixed on the empty road, the clock on the dashboard ticking closer to midnight. Notifications buzzed faintly from his phone on the passenger seat, yet he ignored them. For once he wanted silence, but silence was a cruel companion. The tailored suit on his shoulders felt like armor, heavy and suffocating. He tugged at his tie to loosen it, desperate for relief, but even that small act failed to free him from the grip of exhaustion. His thoughts drifted to the boy he once was, full of dreams of love and freedom, believing wealth would bring happiness. Now, sitting alone, he realized how wrong he had been. His vision blurred for a moment, the steering wheel swimming before his eyes. He blinked hard, trying to steady his focus, but the dull ache in his temple spread to his chest. He pressed a hand against it, the leather of the wheel slick beneath his damp palm. Beads of sweat formed across his forehead as the pain tightened, sharp and unrelenting. He forced his other hand to hold the wheel firm, but his strength faltered. The road stretched endlessly, the lines on the asphalt running together as if mocking him. His breathing grew shallow, uneven, each inhale a battle, each exhale weaker than the last. The glow of the dashboard lights blurred into a haze, his reflection faint in the glass, and he barely recognized the man staring back at him. He had built an empire, but he had built it at the cost of his own soul, and tonight it felt as though that cost had come to collect. His grip loosened briefly, the car swaying ever so slightly, the sound of a distant horn cutting through the night. The noise seemed far away, muffled, as though he were sinking underwater. He tried to sit straighter, to force himself into alertness, but the weight dragging him down only grew heavier. Memories flickered faintly. Dinners eaten alone, echoes in vast empty halls, friends and family lost to the relentless pursuit of success. And with each thought, the loneliness grew louder. The pain in his chest sharpened again, making him gasp, his knuckles whitening as he clutched the wheel. He loosened his tie further, tugging it away from his throat as if air itself were slipping from his reach. His body sagged, his breath unsteady, and his vision darkened at the edges, like curtains slowly closing around him. He fought the pull of unconsciousness, his mind screaming to stay awake, but his body betrayed him. The streetlights ahead stretched into golden streaks, too bright, too far away, and his head grew heavy, tilting forward as the car carried him deeper into the lonely night. Michael Carter, the man the world admired as untouchable, sat powerless on the road, his strength slipping, his chest aching, his consciousness fading into the silence. In the silence of the car, as Michael's head slumped forward and his grip weakened on the wheel, the faint rustle of movement came from the back seat where Emma sat, her small frame pressed against the leather upholstery, eyes wide and uncertain. She had been quiet the whole ride, her hands folded in her lap, the glow of the passing streetlights dancing across her pale face. At just 10 years old, She carried a sorrow too heavy for a child, a grief that lingered ever since she lost her father, the man who once drove Michael's car with steady hands and a warm smile. Michael had promised to care for her, to keep her safe. But tonight, the man who seemed so strong and untouchable looked fragile, collapsing before her eyes. Emma noticed his head dip dangerously close to the steering wheel, his shoulders sagging as though every ounce of strength had drained away, and panic surged through her chest. "Mr. Michael?" Her small voice trembled, barely rising above the hum of the engine. But there was no response. Her heart raced as she leaned forward, her eyes darting between his motionless form and the road ahead. The car swayed slightly, drifting too close to the edge of the lane, the rumble of the tires against the roadside strip sending a vibration through the cabin. Fear wrapped tightly around Emma's tiny frame, her throat dry, her hands shaking as she clutched the seat in front of her. She had never felt so small, so helpless. Yet she knew she could not sit still. The world outside blurred into streaks of shadow and light, and every second the vehicle veered closer toward danger. Her mind raced with fragments of memory, her father's voice teaching her to stay calm in frightening moments, telling her that fear only grows when you let it rule you. She whispered his words under her breath, as if summoning his strength now, in this moment when she needed him most. Her eyes locked on Michael's limp body, his hand sliding slightly from the wheel, and her pulse hammered in her ears. "No, no, please wake up," she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. But he didn't move. The sound of a horn blared behind them, sharp and jarring, and the car jolted forward with frightening momentum. Emma's stomach dropped as she realized the truth. Michael could not save them, and if she did nothing, both of them might be lost. Her small body shook, but her will hardened. She unbuckled her seatbelt with trembling fingers, the click loud and final in the tense silence. Pushing herself forward with all the determination her little frame could muster, she scrambled across the smooth leather, her knees slipping as she reached for the front. Her tiny hands gripped the edge of Michael's seat, pulling herself closer, closer, her breath short and uneven. The car tilted again toward the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. She stretched her arm out, her fingers brushing the steering wheel, but her reach fell short. For a moment, hopelessness threatened to swallow her. Then she planted her foot against the back seat cushion and pushed harder, climbing into the narrow space between the seats, her hair falling into her face as she struggled forward. The steering wheel loomed just inches away, and with one final push, her hand landed on it, gripping tight though it shook in her grasp. Michael's head had slid closer to his chest, his body still slumped, and she could hear the shallow rasp of his breathing. She bit her lip hard, tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not now. "Hold on, please," she whispered fiercely, not sure if she was speaking to him or herself. The wheel jerked slightly under her inexperienced hold, the car wobbling back into the lane before swaying again, the headlights ahead growing larger and brighter with every passing second. Emma's heart thudded so hard she thought it might burst, yet she forced her trembling hands to hold steady, even as her arms ached from the strain. She remembered sitting in her father's lap years ago, her hands resting over his as he pretended to let her steer in an empty parking lot, his voice patient and warm, guiding her every move. That memory was all she had now, and it became her anchor. "Left, right, steady," she whispered, echoing his words, trying to believe she could manage. The car wavered dangerously close to the guardrail, sparks of light flashing in her wide eyes, but she yanked the wheel just enough to pull it back. The tires squealed in protest, but they obeyed her. She gasped, relief mingled with terror, her body tense as though the smallest mistake would shatter everything. She stole a glance at Michael, his face pale and still, and a lump rose in her throat. "Don't leave me. Please don't," she murmured, clutching the wheel tighter. Her small arms trembled under the pressure, the world outside rushing past in dizzying blurs of light and dark, every second stretching long and heavy. But Emma knew she could not stop now. She had to keep going, had to be brave, because in this moment, she was the only one standing between life and disaster. Emma's hands trembled as she pulled herself closer, her small frame pressing against the weight of Michael's slumped body, her voice breaking through the panic that filled the car. "Please, Mr. Michael, stay awake!" she cried, her words soaked in desperation, her eyes glistening with tears that blurred her vision. She tugged at his arm with every ounce of strength she could gather, her tiny fingers digging into his sleeve. But his body remained heavy and unresponsive, leaning dangerously toward the wheel. Fear clawed at her chest, but something inside her sparked brighter than the terror, a flicker of courage she didn't know she had. Gritting her teeth, she pushed against him with all her might, her small shoulders straining as she forced his weight back just enough to clear the steering wheel. Her breath came out in shaky gasps, her heart hammering like a drum inside her chest as she gripped the wheel with both hands, the leather far too large for her tiny palms. The car swerved under her inexperienced touch, tilting sharply before she fought to correct it, the headlights of passing vehicles flashing harshly against her tear-streaked face. Her arms shook, her body trembling, but she held on, refusing to let go, because she knew that if she lost control for even a second, everything would end. Her feet scrambled against the floor, too short to reach the pedals properly, her toes barely brushing the edges. Panic surged again, but then, in a rush of memory, her father's voice echoed in her mind, gentle and steady, teaching her the basics when she used to sit in his lap during quiet evenings. "Hands firm. Don't let go. Trust yourself," she remembered him saying, and the memory steadied her trembling heart. She bit her lip hard, using the flash of pain to focus, her grip tightening as the car wobbled back into its lane. Tears slid down her cheeks, warm against the cool air that seeped through the vents, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them blind her. "I can do this," she whispered under her breath, though her voice was barely audible. The wheel felt alive in her hands, twitching with every bump in the road, resisting her small strength, but she clung to it with the stubbornness of a child who refused to give up. Every second stretched endlessly, the world outside a blur of lights, the hum of the engine filling her ears, yet beneath the chaos, he found a rhythm, faint but real, guiding her hands to steady movements. She leaned forward, her tiny body pressed against the seat, her legs straining to stretch just a little farther, her toes finally finding purchase on the brake. The relief was brief, because pressing it took every ounce of force she had, her muscles aching as she tried to control the car's speed. The vehicle jolted, slowing slightly, and she gasped in both fear and triumph, realizing that she had some control, fragile but hers. Her eyes darted between the road ahead, and Michael slumped beside her, his face pale, his chest rising unevenly, and a fresh wave of determination surged through her. She would not let him slip away, not while she had even the slightest chance to help. Her arms quivered from the strain of holding the wheel steady, the muscles in her hands screaming, but she gritted her teeth and held firm. The headlights illuminated the road signs ahead, their letters sharp and bright, and she tried to read them through her tears, searching for some direction, some hope. The sound of rushing cars around her pressed in, horns blaring, but she refused to look away from the road. "Stay with me, Mr. Michael," she pleaded again, her voice cracking, but this time she did not wait for an answer. She focused everything she had on guiding the car forward, her heart pounding, her mind replaying every word her father had ever told her. She shifted her weight, pressing harder on the brake, adjusting her grip on the wheel, whispering to herself the way he used to guide her. "Steady, steady. Don't be afraid." The tears kept coming, hot and relentless, but courage burned brighter, pushing her forward. Though her body shook with exhaustion and fear, her spirit grew stronger with each passing second, the little girl who once hid quietly in the shadows, now becoming the only shield between life and disaster. The car roared forward under Emma's fragile control, the weight of the machine almost overwhelming her as the dark road stretched endlessly ahead, the white lines blurring beneath the headlights. Her tiny hands clenched the wheel, her knuckles pale, her arms aching with the effort to keep it steady as horns blared from both sides, angry drivers swerving to avoid the erratic vehicle. Each blast of sound pierced her ears, making her flinch, but she refused to loosen her grip, whispering to herself through trembling lips, "Hold on. I'll save you, I promise." Her heart thundered in her chest, beating faster than the engine beneath the hood, fear pounding through her veins, yet refusing to drown the stubborn determination that kept her moving. The world outside became a dizzying stream of lights, street lamps flashing by, headlights bearing down on her, the faint glow of neon signs bleeding into the night. And through it all, she searched desperately for something, anything, that looked like hope. Sweat rolled down her forehead as she leaned forward, her chin barely clearing the top of the wheel, her wide eyes scanning frantically, until at last she spotted a sign in the distance. A faint red glow shimmering against the dark sky. The symbol she had seen before when her father once took her to visit a friend at the hospital. Relief surged through her veins, sharp and fleeting, quickly replaced by the terror of whether she could reach it in time. The tires screamed as she nudged the car between lanes, each movement sending shivers up her arms as the heavy machine resisted her tiny strength. Vehicles honked furiously, drivers yelling unheard words as they swerved aside, their faces briefly illuminated in the passing light, some angry, some startled, none knowing the desperate child who fought for both her life and another's. Emma's breath came in ragged bursts, her chest tight, yet she kept whispering to herself, "Almost there, almost there." The words both a prayer and a command. She pressed her toes harder against the brake, the muscles in her legs straining as she forced the car to slow, but the pressure made her entire body shake, every inch of her small frame trembling with effort. The hospital sign grew clearer now, the red cross shining like a beacon in the night, a promise of safety she clung to with all her heart. Her arms burned, her shoulders aching from holding the wheel so long, but she ignored the pain, focusing only on the glowing entrance drawing closer. The engine growled as the car resisted her braking, but she gritted her teeth, pushing with everything she had, her lips pressed tight as tears streaked down her face. Not from fear now, but from the sheer effort of holding on. The entrance loomed ahead, bright lights spilling across the pavement, doctors and nurses visible through the glass doors, and she cried out in one last burst of determination, her foot slamming down with all the strength her tiny body could muster. The car lurched violently, jerking her forward, the seatbelt cutting into her chest, yet she held firm, steering the vehicle into the driveway. The squeal of tires echoed through the night as the car skidded across the asphalt, veering dangerously close to the curb before she pulled it back with desperate force, guiding it straight toward the emergency bay. Her vision blurred with tears, her arms nearly giving out, but she clung to the wheel until the car finally slowed, jerking to a halt just steps away from the hospital doors. The sudden silence after the screech of rubber was deafening, broken only by the pounding of her heart and the ragged sound of her breathing. Her body slumped, drained of strength, but her eyes flicked immediately to Michael, his head still resting against the seat, his chest rising shallow and uneven. Emma's lips quivered as she reached for him, her voice cracking with exhaustion, yet filled with fierce resolve. "We made it. We made it," she whispered, the glowing red cross above the entrance reflecting in her tear-filled eyes, a symbol of hope and the proof that her courage had carried them, both to safety. The hospital doors burst open as the sound of screeching tires still echoed faintly outside, and in an instant, nurses and doctors hurried toward the car, their voices sharp with urgency, their eyes widening at the sight of a slumped man and a trembling little girl gripping the steering wheel. Strong hands pulled Michael from the passenger seat, lifting his unconscious form onto a stretcher, their movements swift but careful, the wheels clattering against the tiled floor as they rushed him through the sliding glass doors. Emma stumbled out behind them, her small shoes tapping against the cold floor, her chest heaving from exhaustion and fear. The bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room stung her eyes, and for a moment everything felt unreal, like a dream she couldn't wake from. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the stretcher for a second before it slipped away into the crowd of medical staff. Panic swelled inside her chest. "Wait, please," Don't let him. Her voice cracked, the words drowned by the flurry of instructions being shouted around her. She stopped at the doorway to the emergency room, frozen by the red sign above that read, "Authorized personnel only." Her small frame stood trembling in the hallway, the echo of rushing footsteps fading as the doors swung shut in front of her. Silence replaced the chaos, and in that silence, her fear grew unbearable. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the polished floor, her knees pulled to her chest, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Every breath felt jagged, every sob echoing in her ears as guilt pressed down like a heavy stone. What if I was too late? She whispered to herself, her tiny voice trembling in the empty hallway. She buried her face against her knees, her shoulders shaking as she imagined the worst, as if her hands on the wheel hadn't enough. As if her small strength had failed the only man who promised to protect her after her father was gone. Time passed in heavy silence, each minute stretching into what felt like an hour, the ticking of the clock on the wall louder than any noise she had ever heard. Nurses passed occasionally, their shoes squeaking against the floor, but no one stopped to explain. No one answered the questions in her tearful eyes. Emma stayed curled on the chair outside the emergency room, too afraid to move, too afraid to ask. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, but the tears returned again and again, a flood she couldn't stop. Her throat ached from crying, yet she couldn't keep the words from escaping. Broken prayers whispered under her breath, pleading for Michael to wake, begging not to lose him too. Hours dragged on, the night outside giving way to faint traces of morning, the hospital corridors slowly quieting as the storm of panic subsided behind those closed doors. Emma's body eventually grew weak from exhaustion, her eyelids heavy, but her hand refused to let go of the thought of him. She moved to the nearest chair, curling herself into its oversized seat, her small fingers clutching the sleeve of Michael's jacket that she had carried with her, the fabric damp with her tears. She drifted in and out of restless sleep, her heart pounding each time she heard footsteps approach, each time she imagined someone delivering news she couldn't bear. Then, just as the weight of exhaustion pulled her deepest, a soft sound stirred from inside the room. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped out, smiling gently, motioning her in. Emma's heart leapt as she stumbled to her feet, rubbing her eyes with her fists before hurrying inside. The room was quiet now, machines humming steadily, the harsh brightness softened by the morning light creeping through the blinds. And there he was, Michael, his eyes fluttering open slowly, his face pale but alive. Emma stopped at the edge of his bed, too afraid to move closer, her small hands pressed to her mouth in shock. His gaze shifted weakly, and the first thing he saw was her, his little guardian, slumped against the chair at his side, her tiny hand still gripping his larger one, as if she had held it the whole night. Overcome by the sight, Michael's lips trembled as he whispered hoarsely, his voice rough but full of emotion. "You saved me, my little angel." The words cracked something inside Emma's fragile heart, and tears poured again. But this time they were not of fear. They were tears of relief, of love, of gratitude that filled the sterile room with a warmth neither of them had felt in far too long. The days that followed moved slowly, each one bringing with it a sense of renewal Michael had not felt in years. The sterile smell of the hospital gradually gave way to the fresh air of freedom as the day of his discharge finally arrived, and when he stepped out into the sunlight, Emma was there waiting, her small hand clasped tightly around the strap of her backpack, her eyes full of relief and quiet joy. For a long moment, he simply stood still, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face. But what truly lit his heart was the little figure at his side, the child who had carried him through the darkest night of his life. They returned to the mansion together, a place that once felt more like a museum than a home, its high ceilings echoing with emptiness, its polished halls filled only with silence. But now, the echo was different. broken by the sound of Emma's soft laughter as she wandered through the rooms with wide-eyed wonder, her presence transforming the atmosphere more powerfully than wealth or grandeur ever could. Michael watched her closely, not with the detached sense of obligation he once carried, but with the tender awareness of someone who had been given a second chance. He no longer saw her as just his late driver's daughter or a promise he was bound to honor. He saw her as Famit, lie, as the missing piece his life had long been yearning for. In the evenings, when Emma's laughter bounced off the marble walls, Michael found himself smiling without effort, something he hadn't done in years. She filled the spaces that once suffocated him with joy. The dining table, once set for one, now held plates of food they shared, her chatter filling the void as he listened with genuine interest. Her drawings began to decorate his study, crayons scattered across his desk where once only contracts and reports had been. The mansion that had been cold and silent transformed into a living space, warm and alive, glowing with a kind of light that came not from chandeliers but from the pure heart of a little girl who had refused to let him slip away. At night, as Emma curled up in her new room, surrounded by plush toys and soft blankets, Michael would pause by the doorway, watching her sleep, feeling a swell of gratitude so deep it tightened his throat. He thought of all the years he had chased wealth, power, and recognition, believing those things would fill the void inside him, only to realize that true riches had come in the form of a child's bravery and unconditional love. Days turned into weeks, and with every passing moment, his bond with Emma grew stronger, woven not from duty, but from trust, laughter, and shared hope. Michael began to leave work earlier, something his board had never seen him do, just to make sure he could be home in time for dinner or to hear Emma tell stories about her day. The staff noticed the change too, the way his eyes softened when she entered the room, the way his once stern voice carried warmth when he spoke to her. The man who had once been described as untouchable now sat on the floor of his grand living room, helping Emma build castles out of blocks, his expensive suit jacket tossed aside as he laughed alongside her. The transformation was undeniable. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Emma leaned against him, her tiny fingers wrapped around his larger hand, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." The words pierced through him, simple yet profound, echoing the very truth his soul had been searching for. In that moment, Michael realized that love had finally found him, not through grand gestures or lavish wealth, but in the quiet courage of a child who had seen him at his weakest and still refused to let go. From that day forward, he made himself a promise, spoken softly as he looked into the night sky with Emma resting against his side. Never again would she face life's battles alone. He would be her shield, her guide, and her family, not because he was bound by duty, but because his heart had chosen her. And in that choice, the once lonely millionaire discovered the greatest treasure of all, a bond that could never be broken, a love that made his life truly whole.